Hello. In this recording of our Justia webinar, Building a Sustainable Future, Legal Careers in Climate and Clean Energy, Leonard Adler and Matthew Carmel provide an overview of career opportunities for lawyers in sustainability and clean energy, as well as providing job search tips and resources for these areas. Remember, if you'd like to see more Justia videos on law practice and legal marketing, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
Great. Thank you for that kind introduction, Nina. I want to thank Justia for having this session today. And I want to thank Matt for co-presenting. And I want to thank everyone who's here on the webinar. So we have a lot of ground to cover. Just want to mention a couple things at the outset, a little bit of the origin of how this presentation came to be. As Nina mentioned, I'm the host of the Green Jobs Pod, and on one of the episodes had the opportunity to interview Matt, and was just really impressed with all the things that he's doing, both in his individual practice and to help other people who want to use their legal careers in climate. And so we discussed the teaming up together. And then that's given birth to this session that you're going to hear today. There's going to be a lot of resources. Really, the focus of this is to give you a lot of practical job search tips and resources. Don't feel like you need to take them all down at notes. There's not going to be a test at the end. Obviously, this session is going to be recorded. You'll have access to this. And also, all the resources that I'm going to go over, there's a part of one of the websites that Green Jobs Network has. And that resource is called the Climate Career Hub. So links to all the resources I'm going to go over, you'll be able to find them there. So I want to give you an overview, an agenda for what we're going to cover today. So both there's sections I'm going to present, and then there's sections that Matt's going to present. I'm going to kick things off with an overview. So I'm going to go over some kind of themes as you're thinking about careers in the space, kind of touch on a definition since we're going to be using terms like climate jobs and green jobs. After I complete the overview, then Matt's going to take you through a number of very substantive sections, and then he's going to pass it back to me where we're going to walk through a variety of different resources to find these types of jobs. So to kick things off in our overview, just the objective of this presentation, we have a couple of key goals we wanted to accomplish with you today. One is to give you an overview of career opportunities for legal professionals in green and climate. We also want to share with you the stories of attorneys who have made a successful career shift into these fields. Some of you may be in law school, some of you may be just starting out, some of you may be in an established career and are thinking of shifting, so you'll be able to hear some stories along those lines. I'm also going to share some themes to keep in mind. You can think of those as principles or because, again, job search, there can be a lot of aspects to it, so some themes to keep in mind. And as I mentioned, a lot of practical job search tips and resources. So from a definition standpoint, again, you may hear the term climate jobs, green jobs. A variety of organizations will have definitions. I like to be transparent and share with you what my definition is for the work that I do. So it's listed here on the slide, and I describe it as full-time, part-time, or internship opportunities that have a positive social or environmental benefit. And clearly, environment is the core of what Green Jobs Network does, but also the social is in there with intention. So from the environmental standpoint, there are a lot of different areas that encompasses: conservation, clean energy, energy efficiency, and many, many other ones. But also social impact is important in terms of the work that I do. I try to connect people with jobs that match their values. And for something like fair trade, as we'll talk about briefly in a moment, that fits within the broader definition I have in the context of green. And these jobs can be in any sector in the economy: public, private, and nonprofit. So briefly on definitions, there's lots of taxonomies, there's lots of definitions to just give you a little flavor, right? So this is one example where they map it out. This is another one. This is from the Pew Charitable Trust. They describe the clean energy economy, and they break that down to a few different subsectors. And this is from a federal government definition of clean energy jobs. So again, there are a lot of different definitions. I think in whatever context that you're in, it's helpful to just know what is the definition that they're coming from. So I mentioned fair trade. So if you go, for example, to a supermarket, get some fair trade coffee, you see a little fair trade symbol on it, right? So fair trade is not only about helping the environment, but it's also about people, right? Are people being paid fairly for what they produced? And so I share that because that's part of my broader definition of green. So you're just going to cover a couple themes. So the first is that there's many pathways for impact. And so the point here is going to step you through a few themes as you think about, engaging in a career search in this field. And the point with this first theme is that the job search is not a linear process. And there also may be many different interests that you have. And so I think it's important to mention this. And also, whether you're, shifting from your career or if you're starting out, sometimes you may feel pressure. You have to do the right thing or this one choice that determines everything. and want to try to give you some comfort in that there are a lot of different ways to make an impact. And over the span of your career, if you have different interests, you may be able to tap into them and find different ways to make an impact. So, and we're going to illustrate this theme, I'm going to use my own career journey as an example. So I have a number of different things that I'm passionate about. One of them relates to basic human needs and economic justice. I grew up in a low-income family and was fortunate to make it to Stanford for undergrad and so forth, and really wanted to use my education to work on some of those basic human needs issues that I saw growing up. And so when I was as a student, I worked on a number of things at the Kennedy School, at the law school. I co-founded the first law review at any law school that focuses just on poverty issues. They're still publishing it many decades after we founded it. So there are a number of different things that I was explicitly working on, whether it be hunger issues, housing-related issues, that really tapped into that particular interest that I had from an impact standpoint. I did get a law degree from Georgetown, and so I actually did care a lot about the law, wanted to leverage law in different ways. And to me, one of the things that was compelling was to think about how I could use my legal education and background to really kind of make a broad impact at scale. And so one of the ways I pursued that is by working for a national organization that supports law students who want to get involved in public interest work. So these are some photos from trainings that we would do with law students from across the country to really empower them to make an impact. And these are just some more examples from that organization. And then as I was thinking about scale, being able to leverage as the internet was increasing in its scope, I wanted to find a way to get involved in that space. I've had the opportunity to work for a number of leading companies in the space. Nolo is one of them, and I do work for Justia, which is clearly a leader in terms of making access to the law, to lawyers, to legal information and justice more accessible, really touches millions of people. So from an impact standpoint, that's very rewarding for me. In terms of the focus of what we're talking about today, in terms of green and climate, that is another area that I'm passionate about. And so for that, I started out kind of at the beginning. I approached an organization, said I'd like to help put on a job fair for green. And this was about 15 years ago. And so they got on board for that. And it blew away expectations, was covered in the news. So that really just kind of kickstarted things. And then over the years have built out Green Jobs Network, where it connects people to jobs, career resources, and community in a number of different ways. And just touch upon them very briefly. Run lots of job boards. So one of them is at climatechangebjobs.com. Help connect people from a community standpoint on LinkedIn. We run the largest group that's specifically for green and climate jobs. There's more than 130,000 people in it. Other ways we contribute to community building on LinkedIn. Share jobs and career resources regularly. This is kind of an example of a spotlight from the newsletter. And then we've launched a specialty site just around climate law jobs. So if you go to that website, you'll see these are a number of the jobs right now that are law-related jobs that we're spotlighting. So that's the first theme, which is there's more than one way to make an impact. The second theme, if you're thinking about working in green and climate, is to hold two different notions simultaneously, which is to be optimistic, but also to be realistic. So there's a lot of things to say about being optimistic in this space. Really at a high level, macro level, green and climate is a growing field. And we'll take a look at just some data points to briefly, to demonstrate that. So big picture, from a strategic standpoint, to position yourself into a field that's growing, that's smart, reason to be optimistic. At the same time, I always encourage job seekers to kind of keep that reality check, keep your feet firmly planted on the ground, because regardless of whatever the employment statistic of the month is, it can be challenging to find a job. You can, for example, look on a job site, you may see that 100 people have applied for that same job. Those are tough odds to get an opportunity. So it's really important, while this is a growing field, while there are a lot of opportunities, and we're going to talk about them, to really keep that reality check. So, but on the optimism side, I've been doing this work for 15 years. And I can tell folks, this is, yesterday might have been a great time to be part of this field, but today is a great time for sure. So when I started doing this work, you really couldn't buy an electric vehicle. And now as this chart illustrates, millions and millions of electric vehicles, certainly becoming more mainstream. Lots of jobs have been created and are in this space. You can look at renewable energy. There's been a lot of trends over the past decade plus, which is one is that the cost of solar energy has been dropping to deploy it. And so with that dropping of the cost, as it's become more cost competitive, not a surprise. You've seen the amount of deployment, and there's a lot of things on this chart, so don't worry about it. But the big picture here is that these days there's still a huge demand for more energy in our grid, right? If you think about something like AI, for example. And so where's that new energy coming from? Renewable is really leading the way in that. So more and more energy is coming online from renewable, and with that, there are jobs. And so this is just another example, again, taking a long span of time, renewable energy across the United States has more than doubled when you look at renewable sources. Another snapshot, and this is just from this week to really drill down to a specific day. So from this week, this is a snapshot from the California system operator via gridstatus.io. So again, what you'll see on that chart is at some points during the day, more than 60% of the energy in the state of California, the largest state in the country, is coming from renewables. So when I describe macro growing field, the reasons to be optimistic, these are examples of some data points around that. Within solar, these are employment trends in solar energy. Another reason optimism, again, writ large, is funding in this space. Whether you look at VC funding, other sources of funding, there's a lot of money that's being invested in this space, as we'll talk more about later on. So the last theme is that there's a place for you in the space. So, mention, regardless of the specific issue that you're interested in, could be renewable energy, green buildings, or other ones, the particular type of legal work you want to do. This is a large and growing field, and there's a place for you in the space. Doesn't mean you'll find the job that afternoon after you send in the application, but there is a place for you in the space. So very briefly, just to illustrate that, this is a snapshot from a nationwide energy jobs report. So it includes non-renewables as well, but it does cover renewables. This is a snapshot of the occupations. So if you think about, electric power, the point of this chart is to show that not all the jobs are just in, for example, installation, right? There's jobs across different functional areas, including sales, and for purpose of what we're talking about, managerial and professional positions are part of the occupational framework of these areas. There's other resources you can turn to get profiles of different people who are working in the space. This is an example of one resource from IREC that offers that. And mentioning, that when we're talking about climate and green, these are very, very broad, terms. And so within that, as you identify your specific interest, you may say you're really passionate about food or food systems. Well, guess what? There's a whole rich area there. You may say you really care about water and the oceans and the future of that. There's a whole set of occupations and jobs and organizations in those spaces as well. So writ large, there's a place for you in the space. And what's a really good segue now is that I'm going to turn it over to Matt because he's going to talk about very specifically examples of legal occupations within climate.
Thank you so much, Leonard. I'll get the slides up now. There we go. So my name is Matthew Carmel. You've heard a little bit about me. One of the things that I put together in my practice is the Planetary Lawyer Project, which is a newsletter that shares both tips and tricks on doing more climate work as a lawyer, but also job openings in the legal field. And we collected and shared 517 jobs over roughly a year and a half between April 2022 and the end of 2023. We're just finishing up collecting our data for 2024, so we'll have some updated figures in a little bit. But what did we learn from these jobs? What do they tell us about what's available, in light of everything that Leonard was saying? But before, what counts as the climate job? How do we define climate jobs at the Planetary Lawyer Project? I very much like the way that Leonard describes this as, social or environmental impact. And when applying that to the legal space and companies sort of at this large center, I think about a couple different frames. One of those frames is it a climate-focused company? And those are the companies that most align with what is a traditional green job. A solar company, a conservation company, a waste and recycling company that's reducing, heading towards zero waste. The companies that you hear the name, you hear what they're doing, and you immediately think, okay, they're in the climate space. I then think there's one remove out that you can take from there, which is, okay, which companies are in climate intensive industries? And these may be ones you don't necessarily think of, right? I think transportation is a sort of an obvious bridge between a climate focused company and a climate intensive industry. But then think about mining or, manufacturing or the very resource heavy industries, because those industries provide a tremendous opportunity for lawyers to make a difference. Those are the industries that have so much impact on climate, and therefore lawyers can make suggestions, make changes, change sourcing, change vendor contracts, advise on climate goals. All of those different things So that's another way that I like to qualify a climate job as a lawyer. And then we can even take it a step beyond that to really all companies and industries. There is a way, and I believe this firmly, that all companies and industries can do climate focused work. And there's a nonprofit called the Chancery Lane Project, which is founded on that presence that the best way to address climate is for lawyers, no matter their role at companies, to start building climate into contracts, to start building climate into the legal framework of the industries that they're in. Because even if an industry doesn't have as much of a climate impact, there's still an impact to be had. We know that from our everyday lives, that every choice we make has some kind of climate impact. And we can think of jobs through that lens. Turning that over to focus on, okay, well, what actual industries? Our evaluation put about 25% in energy jobs, about 5% in financial. You see the pieces here. Now, we were surprised that only 25% were energy jobs. I was also surprised that over 10% of the jobs we found were in the transportation sector. That's bigger than I expected, but very welcome. And one of the things that I think this shows is people are always asking, what is the trend? Where is the job going to be? And it is important to think about trends and to think about where are the opportunities going to be. But I also think that this chart shows that there are a lot of industries. And I'll talk about this later in some of my tips. But I think that finding the industry where you have the greatest passion and the greatest connection, that is to me more valuable than chasing a trend. Doesn't mean you should be ignorant of trends, but I don't think you should be ignorant of your personal passions either. Another interesting fact is how many of these jobs refer to climate or ESG. Now, given our broad definition of what a climate law job is, maybe this isn't terribly surprising, but only 14% of the jobs that we shared included climate, ESG, or other environmental responsibilities directly in the title. There are a lot of roles out there for would-be climate lawyers that are not expressly climate roles. So if you're on one of the job search sites looking for climate law, looking for searching climate, that's a difficult way to find jobs, and you're going to miss out on a large percentage. And maybe your definition of a climate law job is narrower than mine, but still you're going to miss out on a large percentage, even if you use a narrower definition, without searching more broadly and finding a way to do that. I think it's also interesting because we've all heard that sustainability has to come from the top down. A percentage of these are C-suite roles. Only 5% were general counsel or other C-suite level attorneys. The majority were lower level attorneys. And the size of the company was also kind of all over the place. A large percentage of large companies, right? More than 40% of the jobs are with companies between 51 to 500 employees. And only 3.6% of the jobs are with startups. And that was kind of puzzling to me because we think of how evolving the industry is and how many startups need counsel. I was expecting some more jobs, but I think that might also be that these are companies that are growing and maybe they don't have the need for a first lawyer at that point. So this might indicate that you want to look at slightly larger companies that are a little more advanced on that timeline. How much experience is often required? Well, the average minimum required experience was 4.7 years. But if we look at the distribution, 1/3 of the jobs required less than 3 years of experience and 2/3 required more. So a lot of variability in the required experience, meaning jobs for everyone and every level of experience. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to say that jobs are easy to come by, right? I know plenty of people that are working very hard to find climate jobs, but there is a lot of variability, and there are entry-level positions and advanced positions that we're seeing. So what do you do with that information, right? Like, how do you go from there? And I love this Venn diagram, which is not my creation. It's created by the source information is down there at the bottom. I first used it in a climate workshop that I was attending. This is what I think of when I ask people to follow their passion, right? When I ask them to take the data that I've just shared and synthesize it and follow their passion, I think this is the most important thing to ask. What brings you joy? What is the sources of your satisfaction and delight? Don't think of that necessarily from a climate perspective. I would say, don't think of it from a climate perspective. What are you good at? What are your skills? Are you a very good litigator? Are you in labor and employment? Do you understand regulatory frameworks very well? List all of those out and then think, what are the climate work that needs doing? What are the industries that need climate work? And look for those syntheses because they exist. And one of the things I always tell people who are lawyers who want to get into climate is you don't necessarily need new skills, right? You need to find ways to apply the skills you have to novel situations. And this Venn diagram is a great tool to do so. So how did I do that? What am I doing? So for a moment, I'll talk about my experience, right? So I started at law school like everyone else who wants to become a lawyer. I studied at Fordham Law. I was not the tippy top of my class, but I did rather well. And by some happenstance, I landed at a regional law firm, Riker Danzig, in their environmental practice, doing traditional environmental work, natural resources, hazardous substances, brownfields redevelopment, those kinds of things. I loved what I did, but at some point in time, I wanted to do more. I wanted not just to do environmental work. I wanted to do sustainability. I wanted to do climate. I wanted the things I had to make more of a direct impact on the planet than they were already making. And so I thought, okay, how do I do this? What do I do? And so one of the first things I did was to start to find industry groups where I could get involved and be part of the solutions that they were working on, advocate for things, because industry groups are these amazing collections of people that are working to do something really, really well. So I got involved in the U.S. Composting Council, helped to form the New Jersey chapter of the U.S. Composting Council when it was affiliated with the with the U.S. Composting Council, and got involved in their advocacy and their policy development, and learned so much about the composting industry and its intersection with the zero waste industry, and loved that. Really loved learning all of the climate science and climate impacts and environmental benefits of compost and food waste reduction and all of those things, and getting heavily, heavily involved. And that was a couple of years, and realizing, okay, I've built this really great name for myself in the composting space, but I still don't really have any clients. What do I do about this? How do I translate this into a career that isn't just I'm doing my main work and then doing passion projects on the side? So I met an organization called Green Pro Bono, which connects lawyers with pro bono projects that that are supportive of the planet in some way, and got some cases that were involving legal issues in the climate space. Some composting law cases, some just general other cases. And those allowed me to feel like I was a climate lawyer that day. I had climate clients. I was doing climate work. It was pro bono work, but that's where it started. And those things led and snowballed, and I was able to write for publications like Waste 360 and just build a framework of visibility for myself and just publicity, and received recognition for those things I was doing. And then I started representing several compost clients, right? Several composting companies. I still represent them to this day. I represent, a large group of composting companies and some other large compost related companies. But then that also gave me the opportunity to get into other circles that were relating to environmental and climate, like the Mid-Atlantic Solar and Storage Industries Association, which is another industry association I got involved in, did pro bono work with, did volunteer work with, gained visibility. And I have a thriving solar practice now, where I work with experts across the country on specific real estate issues and specific interconnection issues and all the things that make solar projects work. And I learned that how to do that by taking CLEs, by being involved in industry groups, by taking cases that I was able to effectually and competently represent, and did all of this sort of as an associate and then as a counsel, and then had the opportunity to move over to Offit Kerman, which is a large national law firm, to head their environmental and sustainability practice. And now do a practice that is part traditional environmental, part solar renewable energy, part waste and recycling, part sustainability and climate, and is very engaging and rewarding and valuable. And I still do industry involvement. I still do pro bono work. And I frankly did this without coming into it with tremendous amount of connections, with coming to it with my own privileges, but really building this up from nothing, almost from scratch is a better way to say it, instead of cultivating those kinds of contacts and of visioning and building a career, starting in very small niches and then slowly building and building and building and building on top of that, and having doubts along the way and going, am I just the compost lawyer and that's it? And I don't actually have any clients. I just talk about this and I'm passionate about this thing that most people think is garbage. And it was funny for a time and was difficult also because I didn't know that at the end of the day, I was going to be able to have a thriving career that this was a part of. And yet I do. I have a very comfortable, exciting, engaging career that I wish for all of you if it is what you want, because all of the stories that I've heard from climate lawyers or environmental lawyers or sustainability lawyers, they're different. But to me, they all include a couple things, which is the courage to try something new, the courage to strike out on your own, the willingness to take responsibility for your own career, your own mission, your own what you want out of this career, out of the legal field, and to bring it to a new location through passion and dedication and learning skills. And really, so many people that I speak with about this through the Planetary Lawyer Project have those perspectives. So what do I think are the key lessons that distill down into job search tips? One, immerse yourself in a specific industry. You don't have to limit yourself to one industry like I did at first. You could pick two, you could pick three, but really immerse yourself. Pick an industry group, get involved in it, be visible in it, do things with that group, go to conferences, write if that's what works for you, right? But get involved, learn the business of an industry that intersects with climate. The number of incredible, exciting opportunities that I've gotten as a result of my knowledge of food waste and compost are incredible. One of the stories I like to tell is that as an associate, before I was made counsel, I had sort of made myself known as an advocate for compost and someone who was knowledgeable on the topic. And I got a call randomly. Would you please hold for the head of XYZ private equity company? All right. Yes, I will hold for so-and-so head of private equity firm that I've heard of in the climate space and that has $1 billion under management. And then that gentleman came on the phone and asked to hire me for what became a multi-year project involving food waste technology. It was an incredible experience that came to me because of the dedication and visibility I had in the compost industry. And the same thing has happened in triplicate beyond that, because I dedicated myself to a very niche spot and opportunities came to me. I've gotten calls to take over general counsel positions at large companies in the space, right? It's seems silly. It seems like a cheat code for the universe that you can dedicate yourself to this and people will come. And it's not quick. I've talked to people who get frustrated if it doesn't happen immediately, but it does happen. And that's one reason to chase your passion again, not the hottest trends, because you're going to stay dedicated to the things that are your passion well beyond when others would give up and say, oh, well, it's not worth it. It's not working. It has to be valuable to you independently of the things that you're doing, such that you keep doing it. And there are lots of ways to find value, right? Like I initially thought when I was working in industry groups that I was already a climate lawyer because I was helping that industry. So I may not be being paid, they might not be an individual client, but I was making a difference in that industry. And I was also making connections, which takes me to my next bit. I think that one of the most incredible ways a lawyer can work is to collaborate and contribute with others. We all hear networking and how to network, but I struggled early in my career with what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to network? And it seemed so foreign to me to walk up at a party or an event and just start talking to someone and try to sell them my services. But I think that if you collaborate, if you find a project that you want to work on and find a partner who's willing to work on that project with you, like I've written articles with people who have become my longtime friends and clients now. Written articles with general counsel, written articles with business insiders, written articles with, just scientists or students or things like that. You give value and you receive value. And that's not necessarily receiving value in the form of a job offer, even though that has happened for me on several occasions, but receiving value in terms of that connection. And that connection makes the process of the job search easier and more meaningful. Because I think, at least for me, that's what I was always seeking, is more meaning in my career and my day to day. And then I think these are all tips for how you will be visible. How do you increase your visibility? But I want to make sure that everyone knows they should be doing this on their own terms. What works for me may not work for you. You may not want to stand in front of an audience as a keynote presenter. You may not want to write an article on a certain topic. You may not want to network in a traditional way, or you may want to do all of those. But figure out what are your terms and do them, and don't try to do this the way that someone else would do them. And none of these may sound like great job tips because they're kind of roundabout, indirect. And yet I think that this is what goes alongside the rigorous job search of applying and writing cover letters and all of those things, is developing this unique value proposition, which is really what you're doing here through these steps on this list of why you are the lawyer to be hired for a certain position. But as I said, there'd be something that works differently for everyone. And this is what has worked for me. And with that, I will be handing it back to Leonard.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. It was just really inspiring and helpful information. And for those who are attending, hopefully you can see why, after having the opportunity to speak with Matt on the Green Jobs pod, I thought it'd be great. You were just talking, Matt, about collaborate, to be able to do that with Matt, to be able to bring some of his experience, his story, on the ground inspiration, to be able to share that. So again, really great stuff. And then for those again who are here on the webinar, both what Matt was talking about, I know he's condensed some of his material and I'm doing that as well. Probably combined, the two of us could have a 2-hour kind of full-on workshop with you all. But we're trying to make sure we condense that to make sure we get this done in the time that's allotted. And again, like I'll stick around for questions afterwards. So really want to build on what Matt's how he concluded his materials and basically give you, again, in as compressed a manner as I can, some tools for your toolkit for your job search. So let's dive in. So the first part, again, some of this will kind of build on what Matt was talking about, and then we're going to go through a lot of practical tips, is if you're kind of at a point where you're considering engaging in the job search process, whether, again, you're coming out of school, doing a shift, or anything in between, is to kind of think about these two concepts. Are you in an exploratory phase or a searching? And it's not like you only can be in one or the other. You can be in both, but just each of these has different things that go along with it. So when I kind of think about exploring, that's a process where I might be learning about different opportunities, different sectors, really trying to understand, what do I want, right? Versus searching, I know what I want and I just need to go get it. So just, again, really briefly, think of this as I'm really going to touch on some kind of high level points on this because we have a lot of ground to cover. So if you're exploring, here's some things to think about, to ask yourselves, well, what is it that you're exploring? One thing you might be exploring is what issue or what sector, Matt was talking about, play to things that you care about. There may be an exploration process that you need to go through to figure out. And that can occur in a lot of different ways. Do I care about conservation, renewable energy, food? What is it that really lights my fire? So that may be one type of thing you're exploring, is the sector or issue or cause that you care about in green and climate. Separately, you might be exploring what kind of work do you want to do. And on that, I really like the Venn diagram that Matt had too, because it also spoke about what brings you joy. And there are a lot of different aspects of that from a work standpoint. So do you like working with data? Do you like working with people? That might be something else you're doing some exploration. Do you like public speaking? Another thing would be the job function or legal skill set. Are you exploring doing something different in that in terms of the type of work you have done in legal practice versus something else you might want to do? There might be some exploration you're doing on that. And then an additional point is the work environment. Again, we're talking about green, we're talking about climate, we're talking about things that relate to the natural world as well. Do you like working at a desk? Do you like working outdoors? Small organizations, big one. These are all kinds of things where if you are in an exploration phase, to potentially give yourself the opportunity to explore those. And then again, these are just some tips. And again, Matt touched on a number of these things. One is, do your homework, and that can comprise on that can occur in a lot of different ways. Connecting with people and organizations in your network or potentially outside your network. And Matt gave really great examples of things that he did, connecting up with associations, he connected up with Green Pro Bono, really connecting with people and organizations, participating in events and different communities. And again, one key takeaway that I got from what Matt was talking about is to do things, right? So experiment, try something out. After you do it, take time to reflect. Hey, is that working? Am I excited about this? Maybe not, do something different, but really do things to get that feedback for yourself in terms of where to go next. And it's important to listen to your instincts in all of this. There's a lot of information, a lot of emotions you may experience through this process, is to take the time where you can do that. So just really to give a couple quick examples of the points I just highlighted from an exploring. So for example, if you're attending events, when it comes to green and climate, there's all kinds of events. There's small events, there's large scale events. Just to give you some examples, this is a large event here where I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. One of the things I've been seeing a lot more in the past couple of years are specific climate weeks. These are like mega events where there's like dozens, hundreds of events taking place in a particular city. So there's a flagship like New York Climate Week that people may be familiar with. San Francisco has one. DC just announced this is going to be their first ever. So they are looking for people actually to help put it on, for example. So this is next year. LA just did their first ever climate week. Right? So they've got their next one taking place next year. So there's all kinds of events that you can plug into in this space. When it comes to communities, there's all kinds of communities. There's in-person communities, there's online communities. This is just to give you an example of an online, community that has some in-person, gatherings as well, Women in Climate. And there's many other ones. So that was exploring. So again, really condense that, but just to highlight a couple things if you're thinking about, hey, I'm in an exploring stage. So the bulk of what I'm going to cover now is searching, which is you have some idea about what you want, and now you need to figure out how do you find it. So what I'm mostly going to cover are different tips for how do you uncover specifically job opportunities in these spaces. And then I'm going to just very briefly touch upon AI, because these days you can't have a presentation unless you say something about AI. And then I'm going to close with just, again, an acknowledgement about the importance of your professional presence. So in terms of uncovering opportunities, one tip to share with you is that don't forget what you already know about finding any kind of job, right? So there are general job boards out there. There are general job boards. There's also legal specific job boards. Use those. Employers may be posting on those because those reach large audiences. So for example, Indeed is a screenshot of a recent posting that is relevant for what we're talking about here. Justia has a property, Justia Legal Jobs. So if you go do searches on there, you'll find jobs specifically to what we're talking about. This is a sustainability counsel job just in the past week in New York. This is another one if you have a real estate background. This is in Tennessee. These are both climate, sustainability, green legal jobs that are available. So both general purpose job boards, general legal job boards. Now, specifically in this space, there are a number of green and climate job boards, and I do kind of categorize that in a few areas. There's general ones across the host space. There's ones that are specific to a particular issue area, and then there are ones that overlap with green and climate, like nonprofits. And as I mentioned at the outset, Green Jobs Network maintains a list of all these boards. We're not going to cover them all, but just to give you a little bit of a flavor, Green Jobs Network runs what I would describe as a general green job board, so climate change across all these different sectors. We run another job board. This is an example of a recent posting for an associate attorney at the Sierra Club. And I'm mentioning there's ones that are specific to a particular topic area within green and climate. So if you're really passionate about water issues, right, there's a job site, Josh's Water Job, specifically for water jobs, for example. And that's true across different of these sub areas within green and climate. And mentioning the things that overlap with green and climate. So for example, the nonprofit sector, Idealist is a very popular job board for the nonprofit sector. Not all the jobs obviously on there are going to be climate or sustainability, but some will be, right? So the Southern Environmental Law Center, they have some job postings on their site related to obviously green and climate. Another thing that's important to mention in the context of what we're talking about are fellowships. I'm seeing more and more fellowships that can provide that very important first step, that first job within green and climate. So whether you're about to graduate law school or potentially shifting, those something else to pay attention to. In the part of the country where I am, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, they launched their first ever environmental justice law fellowship program. These are paid opportunities that gets your foot in the door. You get to do real legal work in the field. So when I think of things like job boards or even fellowships that are publicized, I view those as kind of the lowest hanging fruit because employers have taken the time to actually go out and publicize an opportunity. But there's more jobs out there. Sometimes people may use a phrase like the hidden jobs or hidden. And so what I try to do is to give a variety of tips for your toolbox to how do you uncover these jobs that aren't just on the job boards. So we're going to run through a number of these. So the first is what I call going direct, which is to identify a place that you might want to work for and then see if they're hiring directly. And so some tips for compiling that. One would be make a list of organizations you're interested in working for. Review materials from different associations, and Matt touched upon that. You can look at things like exhibitors or presenters from conferences and follow the news. So this is an example I'm familiar with a company called Stripe. They're leading in a company in the payment processing. I thought, all right, that might be a cool company to work for. Well, if you go to Stripe's website, they have a legal job in climate. That's, there's not that many of them, but that's an example of one where if you go to them, and if they were on your list, that'd be a cool employer, you can uncover jobs. Another company I'd be excited to work for is Apple, right? So if you go to their website, they actually have a counsel position on Apple just by going to their website and searching for jobs. And not only is this true in the private sector, but also public sector, nonprofit sector. So again, just to give you some illustrations, you might be interested in working for the California Energy Commission, go to their website, see what they're hiring. And that can be true for utility companies and many other ones. Same thing true with the nonprofit sector, let's say educational institutions. It could be your alma mater or other schools you'd be interested in working for, potentially, whether it's professor or from a practice standpoint in clinics, right? So this is a job right now that's posted at Harvard's law school, specifically around energy and the environment. And so again, whether or not it's posted on a job board, if you keep them on your list and if you are active in searching, these are things that you can uncover. Another place, just to give one last example, here in the Bay Area. So again, the Presidio, it's a cool place, and they actually have an assistant general counsel position. And Matt mentioned associations, so I'm not going to spend that much time, but more just to reiterate that for any kind of issue or topic or sector within green and climate, there's going to be, whether it be city, state, national kind of networks of different associations, trade groups, or others that are really helping move the field forward. And so by going to those sites, you might be able to uncover a conference that's coming up. There could be a list of members, and those members may be employers potentially. So this is an example in solar, the American Solar Energy Society. They've been around for decades. They have a lot of useful resources that potentially you can leverage from a job seeking standpoint. Mention conferences. Again, there's lots of them. This is an example in Green Building, one that just took place. When I say from a job search standpoint, if you look at who exhibits, it potentially costs money to exhibit at a conference, whether you're bringing staff out, booth, and so forth. And so looking at lists of who's exhibiting at these conferences, those could potentially turn into employer leads for you. Look at their website, see if they're hiring, contact them. And if the conference is coming up, if you stop by their booth, it could be a great way to make an initial introduction. Last point I mentioned is following the news. These days, there's lots of different news relevant for our space, and then also you can leverage from a job seeking standpoint. Some news you may come across is a company announcing a new plant, a new breakthrough, a new contract, new funding they got. So this is a battery company, Form Energy. They announced they raised more than $400 million. From a job seeker standpoint, if I was interested in this, I would put them on my list. And if you actually look at Form Energy's website today, you'll actually see they're hiring for a council position. So again, following the news can be another way to uncover potential employers. Email lists is another useful thing to uncover opportunities, right? So a great thing about email lists is that jobs come to your box. So that's great. So there's a couple of ones to mention. This is one from a group called Diversity and Sustainability. You can join their group, get emails with jobs in it. Green Jobs Network runs one. I'm at Green Job List. I was just checking the most recent newsletter, had a number of different council positions. And Matt runs the Planetary Laura Project. So again, what that does, curates job postings for green and climate. So definitely all the ones I just mentioned, those are free to subscribe. Justia also has a free jobs newsletter, and in those as well include jobs for green, climate, and sustainability too. So that's Justia Legal Jobs, free jobs newsletter, jobs in your inbox. So a couple more things. So academic institutions, again, nowadays there's more and more, there may be freestanding sustainability departments on campuses that have opportunities. There may be employers, there may be fellowships, there may be job fairs. I'm certainly seeing more and more activity happening at academic institutions. So I would encourage you to go back and leverage your alma mater and see if there's ways they can be helpful in your green and climate search. And then the last couple tips is following the money. So if someone were to ask me, where are jobs today, but also where might jobs be tomorrow? One of the tips I would tell them is follow the money, because where the money is being invested today, that's where the jobs will be tomorrow. And so the question is, how do you identify where some of the money is going? Couple things to mention. So writ large, there has been a downturn overall within climate funding, but big picture, there's a lot of money. There's billions of dollars that are still being spent, public sector, VC firms, and many other ones in this space. So we're talking about billions of dollars. Many organizations are getting supported. This is a very recent announcement just from the past week. This is from Elemental Impact. And if you can see, they just announced their funding, 16 different organizations. They just announced more funding. So funding is happening all the time in this space. And then if someone say, how do you identify some of this funding? There are a number of resources, again, I've linked to some of those on the Green Jobs Network website, but one of them is CTVC. So they're at ctvc.co. They have a free newsletter. In the newsletter, you'll be able to see deals of the week, like the one there you can see there, to being able to uncover new funding. And so something that overlaps with this point, but I think it's worth calling out distinctly, is following the startups. If someone were to say where are jobs going to be tomorrow, and certainly where there's some jobs today, is to follow the startups, because startups may be earlier in their life cycle. As they grow and grow and grow, there may be more and more opportunities. And so a couple of ways to identify startups are through looking at investment firms in the space, as well as incubators and accelerators. So nowadays in this space, there's more and more dedicated VC firms that what they do is they fund things in climate, sustainability, or related sectors. So this is an example of one of them. That's all they do. So if I was looking for startups, I would go to some of these funders and look and see who are your portfolio companies. That would give me a list of potential employers, whether today or going to the future. This is another example, Greentown Labs. Mentioned there's both dedicated funds or VC firms that are funding, also incubators that are providing a variety of support, office space, mentorship, and other things. Same thing, look at who is in their cohorts, who's in their portfolio, who's in their incubator or accelerator. One great thing about these organizations now, I'm seeing more and more, I call these portfolio job boards. So with some of these firms, instead of you having to go through 20, 30, 40 different startups, go to their website, check the job page over and over again, what they've done is they've brought together across their entire portfolio an aggregated job board. So in one search, you can search for jobs across all their portfolio companies. So this is an example from Breakthrough Energy. One of the specific job function areas you can do a search for is specifically legal, right? So that's another example being able to search across jobs, across many startups in one shot. And then mentioning just the last couple things, briefly touched upon AI. So Green Jobs Network has some AI services for your job search. Actually has a free climate career coach, as well as different AI powered tools for your search. And then just briefly want to close with a mention about your professional presence. Clearly, we're talking about the job search. So thinking about how you present yourself professionally online is important. People may follow up and look you up. And so whether that's your own website, certainly if you're doing things on LinkedIn, it's important. That's a screenshot from mine. But also thinking about different directories where you either have a presence or could have a presence. And so just want to acknowledge Justia, because Justia has, for example, a host section for environmental lawyers, right? So people may be searching for that. And so having a really strong profile there can enhance that opportunity for you to get that contact, get that phone call. And just to give an example, someone searching online, if let's say they were looking for a California environmental lawyer, that page I just showed you would be one of the ones that someone may very well visit. So just encourage you to invest the time in that. And then just to wrap up again, went through, I know, a lot of different resources. So I appreciate your patience. Again, all these things are available in the Climate Career Hub, which you can find at climatechangejobs.com. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time and attention. And I think we have left some time for question and answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leonard and Matt, for all of your insights and providing just some insight about green legal jobs and all those great resources. We really appreciate it. Like Leonard mentioned, we now can jump into audience questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through that Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. You can go ahead and submit them, and then we'll go through them. All right, looks like we're getting some coming in. Our first one is, and feel free to take this, both of you or either of you, what skills or experiences are most valuable for lawyers who might be looking to transition into sustainability or clean energy roles?
So I can start. So they're very different things as to what skills are most valuable for lawyers looking to transition to sustainability. The first thing that I would say is this question is well-intentioned, but backwards, right? Like the question you want to ask is, what skills do you have and where can they be put to use? And I hope that I don't give offense by saying it's backwards. I don't mean that in any kind of offensive way. I just mean that it's such a helpful reframe to think, what skills do I have and how can I use them? But then, right, like if we take sustainability and clean energy, the answer is different. Right? If we talk about clean energy, I think that there are a tremendous number of M&A transactions going through in the clean energy space, mergers and acquisitions. So all of the skills that are involved in mergers and acquisitions are in high demand, whether that be tax counsel, whether that be general corporate counsel, whether it be the specific subject matters, but also those projects are being developed. So what skills are very valuable in that? Real estate skills, because these are all built somewhere. There's a lease involved in every one of these transactions. There's usually a land use approval that's involved. So then you can have a land use, skill set. So that's showing how a hot area like clean energy, these different skill sets relate to different jobs that are being done in that space, which is another reason I say, look at your skills and go to there. But the other way to do it is if you know where you want to go, then as the questioner has asked, break it down like this and start asking, okay, what are the different jobs, right? What are the different parts of that climate endeavor? And as I've said, the clean energy space, you have transactions, you have project development, you have project finance, you have all these different things. What skills are involved and go about it like that. If we take it from the sustainability perspective and the person is asking more in line of thinking of, climate disclosures or those kinds of more what people think of as sustainability, then you want to look at, SEC type skills or counseling skills or regulatory interpretation skills or those kinds of things. Now, I will counsel that those jobs are less, right? They're fewer and farther between, those jobs that are focused on that. It is more important to me usually to focus on it from a different perspective and then build that expertise within whatever role you're in than trying to pursue those roles, which are very limited and very difficult to obtain.
Yeah, maybe just real briefly, because I want to make sure we have time for more questions. I think Matt covered a lot, and I just want to kind of reiterate what Matt is saying in terms of playing to your strengths or your interests. So what that is go there rather than trying to identify something else and chase it. I think that, just to emphasize that, I think the only other point I would say is, as part of that process, to me, there's topical expertise. Depending on where you're at and where you want to go, there certainly can be a lot of good upside, saying if you wanted to, let's say, transition into alternative proteins or food systems, to become kind of increase your subject matter expertise in that. And that process from a subject matter standpoint is different than also thinking through from a kind of functional skills standpoint. Do you want to keep doing what you're doing from a kind of legal practice, or there's new skills that you want to, like, suddenly want to become an expert in SECs or M&A, so forth. So I just want to highlight those two different types of skill areas.
Awesome. Thank you both for that insight. And kind of relatedly, we got a question about misconceptions if you're going to make that transition. So this person asks, what are the most common misconceptions about transitioning to environmental and sustainability focused legal careers?
I'm happy to go first again if you want.
Yeah.
So that it has to happen all at once is, I'd say, a misconception that we haven't touched on at this, right? Like, I did not make the transition like that. Like, it didn't happen in one day. I like to talk about it about 1-degree changes, right? Like, I changed one tiny micro aspect of my career and then changed another tiny thing. And after a period of time, I was able to look back and go, well, now I'm doing it, right? Like, and some changes are quicker than others, right? Like, when I switched jobs and went from a job that didn't have sustainability in the title to a job that does have sustainability in the title, that felt like a big change and was a big change. But so that's sort of like an all at once. If you're going to take a new job, that's going to be a really big change. And I would say, to what we've saying, another misconception is that you have to change everything about what you're doing, right? That you're not going to continue to use the same skills. And I think this ties into another question that's in the Q&A, is that you need a specific certification or accreditation or degree or something like that. I personally don't think you need any of those things unless you want them and it factors into what you're trying to accomplish. Because there are specific certifications that can be helpful, but I don't have any. And that's not to say that I wouldn't benefit from some of them. There certainly are great certifications, but it's just not something that was part of my journey to here. And it doesn't have to be part of yours unless you want it to be.
Yeah, and again, just to build on that, I think the point about trying to limit the number of changes you're doing simultaneously is really, I don't know if you think about it as like a risk management strategy, or just it makes it easier. So for another dimension, for example, is location. If you said, I want to change the field I'm working in, the type of work I'm doing, and then where I'm doing it, that's changing so many different variables at once. And so really, again, just to reiterate, is think about, is there just one thing I can change and keep some other things constant? Because that certainly can help you out. And then the point about myths, and this is a broader point, but one of the more common myths is that there's only a certain type of role or function or skill that's needed within this field. And so a lot of times I might have to have, let's say, an advanced science degree if I'm going to be involved in the electric vehicle space, for example, or whatnot. Or the only jobs in solar are installer positions. So that was why I kind of included in the presentation that there's a job for you in the space. There are legal roles of different kinds throughout this field.
Awesome. Thank you, Leonard and Matt. That really helps make it feel a little bit more tangible, not so abstract. We have time for about one more question. So the next person asked, you talked a lot about actual jobs, but what types of maybe pro bono work or volunteer work opportunities are there, and how could someone go about finding them to kind of break into the field if they're looking to?
Matt, take it away. You can even do a plug.
You got it. So I think that if you're looking for these opportunities and where it is, read the newsletter, the Planetary Lawyer Project. I talk about this a lot. The link is in the chat from earlier. But the other piece is, again, focus on where you want to go, right? Like that's the first piece. Focus on where you want to go. If you want to go into clean energy, if you want to go into transportation, if you want to go somewhere, if you don't know where, think about it. But, right, like I talked about industry groups, you can join industry groups and volunteer there. I've served as board members, I've served as committee members, I've served as legal counsel, pro bono legal counsel to trade associations. The same thing, you can switch that all over to the side of charities, right? Like you can do work with charities, you can do all of those different things. And the work you do does not necessarily need to be legal, right? Because you're trying to determine whether you're trying to build experience, credibility, or your network. And you can think about volunteer and pro bono work as doing all of those things. But if what you're really asking is, okay, I want to be a clean energy attorney and I want to figure out how to get experience with clean energy work, that is something you have to be a little more strategic about in trying to get those kinds of experiences. Clean energy is an example. There's not as much pro bono as I would like. What the pro bono resource that I use is Green Pro Bono, which is an excellent organization that matches lawyers with pro bono opportunities. I've done a lot of work for them from a variety of things, sometimes to build skills, sometimes otherwise. But the point I was just going to make was, in the clean energy space, it's hard to come across those kinds of cases. So the better way to volunteer is to get involved in an industry group, to write articles, to do those kinds of things. And you're building experience through self-study, through hearing what's going on in the industry, through following the news, through doing your own analytical evaluations of things. And in other areas, like in the composting industry, I took interesting cases that were all about how do the composting regulations work, state by state, what's going on here. And so I was able to build specific knowledge both about the regulations and the way it worked, and about how the industry worked. So there's really to choose your own adventure of climate, of what do you want to do, how do you want to accomplish it, and there are a tremendous number of ways to do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your additional insights and answering your audience questions. And thank you all so much for submitting your questions today. We want to thank you for joining us for another Justia webinar. As I mentioned at the top of today's presentation, we wanted to remind you all of a great free law resource that you have access to as a member of Justia Connect, the Justia Daily Opinion Summaries. As a reminder, you can select the practice areas and jurisdictions that you're most interested in, and you can receive updates right to your inbox. So if you're interested, you can go to newsletters.justia.com. I also placed a couple links in the chat, both from Matthew and Leonard, if you want to learn more about their organizations or connect with them directly. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next clip.